Hello and welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. We're sitting here with a very sore throat today. This is what happens at the end of a campaign season. I can barely speak because I had a head cold from exhaustion. But now it's time to recover. So thanks for joining us. We do have another jam-packed, action-filled information overload coming your way. I am going to try to not talk quite as much, but I've got some interesting video clips to kind of fill the time. So in order for us to really move forward, we're going to just take a look at our Prager University segment of the week, and we're going to go with Hamilton, the man who built America.
It would only be a slight exaggeration to say that Alexander Hamilton invented the United States of America. George Washington was the guiding star, Thomas Jefferson the visionary, Benjamin Franklin the sage. But Hamilton was the pragmatist, the man who got it done. This most self-made of self-made men took a country with no past and planned its future. He was born on January 11th, 1755, on the island of Nevis. This was not the Caribbean of your cruise fantasy, quite the contrary. As Ron Chernow writes in his biography of Hamilton, while other founding fathers were reared in tidy New England villages or cosseted on baronial Virginia estates, Hamilton grew up in a tropical hellhole. Sugar plantations, slave auctions were a regular feature of island life. The spectacle, buyers swinging branding irons as they surveyed the human merchandise, made a permanent impression on Hamilton. He was a fierce abolitionist his entire life. Abandoned by his father at an early age, his mother died of yellow fever when he was 14, leaving the teenage boy destitute. A local judge had to buy him shoes so that he could attend her funeral. He soon took a job as a clerk for a local merchant. Before long, he was running the business, coordinating shipments of mules and codfish, calculating currency exchanges, and advising sea captains on how to deal with pirates. It was an unmatchable apprenticeship in trade, credit, and commerce. In 1773, he arrived in New York to attend King's College, the forerunner of today's Columbia University. Swept up in the revolutionary fervor of his adopted country, he dropped out to join the Continental Army. He quickly came to the attention of George Washington, who made him a staff officer. The sonless Washington called the fatherless Hamilton, "my boy." Fellow officers later remembered, "Call Colonel Hamilton," as Washington's instinctive utterance when important news arrived. As Washington's trusted aide, he was involved in every aspect of running the war, including actual fighting where he distinguished himself on multiple occasions. But more than anything, it was his dealings with the weak and indecisive Continental Congress that shaped his political views. The problem with Congress, in Hamilton's view, was that too few members took the idea of nationhood seriously. They quarreled over their narrow interests rather than uniting over the national interests. As the war was winding down, Hamilton laid out the choice before the country in a widely read 6-part essay. "We could become a noble and magnificent federal republic," he wrote, "closely linked in the pursuit of a common interest, or we could stumble ahead as a number of petty states with the appearance only of union." It was clear where Hamilton stood. The speed by which the United States became a unified nation with a cohesive federal government is largely a result of his tireless efforts before, during, and after the Constitutional Convention. Washington named Hamilton, still only 34, to be the first Secretary of the Treasury. He served in the post for almost 6 years. His task was nothing short of Herculean: put the country drowning in war debt and teetering on the edge of bankruptcy on a sound financial footing. He succeeded, and in doing so set the course for America to become the world's most prosperous nation. Historian Leonard White writes that Hamilton was not only the greatest administrative genius of his generation, but one of the great administrators of all time. There's no telling what Hamilton might have achieved had he lived a longer life. Instead, he died one of the most pointless deaths in American history. As hard as it is to fathom today, he was killed in a duel with the Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr, a man with whom he had a long and bitter political feud. Hamilton fired his pistol harmlessly into the air. He never intended to kill Burr. To Hamilton, it was an affair of honor. But to Burr, it was something else. The Vice President took careful aim, shot, and mortally wounded his rival, who spent some 30 hours in agony before succumbing. Hamilton was 49. Hamilton lived in a time when the great danger to the national project was a government that was too weak. We live in a time when many believe that the great danger to the nation is from a national government grown too strong. The ideal, Hamilton would have told us, is somewhere in between. But perhaps America will have to wait for another Hamilton to achieve that happy medium. I'm Joseph Tartakovsky, Senior Fellow at the Claremont Institute for Prager University.
I bring up Hamilton because now that the midterm elections are over, we still haven't found that happy medium. Or have we found that happy medium in the fact that we now have divided government? Maybe that's what the founders intended, that the two parties, even though they didn't have the official party status until 1791 after the Constitution was written and ratified, the fact is that the founding fathers may have known that there's going to be a divide, that not everybody's going to get along. So if we have checks and balances, that, well, yeah, and that brings up the Federalist Papers. I mean, those guys didn't always get along themselves. So here we are, right after the midterms. The Democrats are in the U.S. House of Representatives. The Republicans increased their lead in the Senate. We have President Trump as a Republican. We have some state legislatures and governors that swayed over to the Democrats. And things are all messed up, just like they usually are.
They claim factions would be the end of the republic.
And yes, the founding fathers did claim that factions were going to be the end of the republic. So here we are. And of course, with President Trump, he had to make a change in his administration right after the midterms. Don't worry, all presidents do that, regardless of party. Yes, President Trump, as you probably know by now, has requested and received the resignation of Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Let's take a look.
Donald, welcome.
Jeff Sessions and President Donald Trump used to be close, sharing both a friendship and an ideology.
I am pleased to endorse Donald Trump for the presidency of the United States.
Sessions had risked his reputation when he became the first U.S. senator to endorse the celebrity businessman. His early backing helped Trump's effort to be seen as a legitimate candidate.
Of the office upon which I'm about to enter.
Nearly a year after his endorsement, Sessions raised his hand in the Oval Office, becoming the nation's 84th Attorney General, the country's top law enforcement officer.
Hey, thank you.
A cloud of suspicion about Russian meddling in the election hung over the Trump presidency from the very beginning.
And nothing but the truth, so help you God.
In his confirmation hearings, Sessions said he didn't meet with Russian officials.
And I didn't not have communications with the Russians.
But a few weeks into his tenure, reports emerged that Sessions met with the Russian ambassador to the United States during the campaign. At the time, Trump expressed his continued support of Sessions.
Mr. President, do you still have confidence in the Attorney General? Total.
Sessions soon recused himself from any campaign investigations.
I should not be involved investigating a campaign I had a role in.
Trump seethed about Sessions' decision for months, publicly venting on Twitter against him while musing privately about firing Sessions.
I told you before, I'm very disappointed with the Attorney General, but we will see what happens. Time will tell. Time will tell.
In a series of tweets, Trump called Sessions beleaguered, criticizing him for not investigating Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. Trump viewed Sessions' recusal as disloyal, arguably a grievous offense for this president, and a move that led to the end of his short career as Attorney General. Walter Ratliff, The Associated Press.
So this is much ado about nothing, honestly, because this all happens. This is part of the process. Nothing to see here, folks. But when Attorney General Sessions left the office, for the final time, he received a round of applause from his staff, who really did like him. Of Attorney General Sessions was actually a true professional and great to work for, from what I understand, from within inside the legal community. He did not fit President Trump's style. I think the president's looking for somebody more combative. The recusal of himself from anything associated with the Russian investigation or Hillary Clinton, that took away his effectiveness. And so now, in the next 2 years, the president's moving on from Sessions, and we'll see who he appoints. Now, there is some criticism that it should be Rod Rosenstein, who is the Assistant Attorney General, should be promoted up. There's a lot of Democrats who say that they should be, it should be that way in succession because of U.S. code. There are people in the White House who say that he should be able to choose whoever he wants in a lateral move. We'll find out what happens there, but for the meantime, there's the Chief of Staff has now been, on an interim basis, is our new Attorney General. And here is Kellyanne Conway, the White House spokesperson, who is going to be discussing that and other issues pertinent to the White House in front of reporters today.
Kellyanne, good morning. What would you say to Democrats who now say the firing of Jeff Sessions is a constitutional crisis? And can you outline why Matt Whitaker was put in that post and not Rod Rosenstein?
Well, the Democrats don't seem to begin or end a sentence these days without having the word crisis in it. So it's not a constitutional crisis. And it's not even what, unfortunately, a CBS reporter said on the late night TV show last night, presidential crisis. I took note of that. I think it's a very inappropriate thing to say by a journalist, by an unbiased reporter for a major network. Anyhow, Matt Whitaker has been Chief of Staff for over a year, so I think this is and Rod Rosenstein is in his job as Deputy Attorney General. He's here at the White House yesterday for a meeting, is expected here for a different meeting, regular order of business today. That shows that the President has a continuum with the Deputy Attorney General and the Chief of Staff. So the Mueller investigation we think is winding down, but we have no way of knowing. This President and his team have been very compliant with the Mueller investigation. I think over 1 million pieces of paper have been produced. Over 33 or so individuals have either produced documents or testified or both, or met or both.
Just for clarity as it relates to Matt Whitaker here, is the President's intention to impede the Mueller investigation in any way?
I just answered that. You've been trying that for a year and a half, and the Mueller investigation has gone forward using your tax dollars. We have not impeded it at all. We had an Attorney General who was recused from it. We now don't have an acting Attorney General who's recused from it. Nobody wants to prolong it. We've done everything that we've been asked to do. When I say we, I mean the Trump team here and outside of the building. As I understand it, 33 witnesses or 33 individuals who have been called, millions of pieces of paper produced, and we'll see what Mr. Mueller's report says. The President made his comments about the shooting, and his FBI is working with the local and state law enforcement in Ventura County. He's also expressed, as I will, our condolences to the dead and the grieving families and those who are still looking for their loved ones, as I understand it. You know how this goes. The first responders are doing a tremendous job, and people are grieving and also people are looking for their loved ones, their children, I guess, and their loved ones. And also, you know that the emergency room personnel spring into action and do a fantastic job saving lives and mitigating damage. I just saw that as I was finishing my hit. Of course, I'm praying for her. She's a very tough woman, 85 years old, falling, I believe, at the court ahead of Justice Kavanaugh's investiture, where the President and the First Lady are expected to be momentarily. But obviously, we're praying for her. I understand she's been to the hospital. I don't have that. I didn't second source it. I know some of you don't bother either. But in any event, I like that, didn't you? In any event, we're praying for her, and we know how tough she is. I've known her for many, many years. Got to see her just a few weeks ago here at the swearing-in of Justice Kavanaugh, so she'll be in our prayers. I hope she has a full and speedy recovery.
And so there you have it, folks. That came right out of the one of the main spokespeople for the White House. Another interesting thing that happened was CNN reporter Jim Acosta got his credentials for White House access pulled. This is the thing that every reporter fears the most if they are in the White House press pool. I have actually had White House reporters tell me that personally over the years. They fear. That's one of the reasons why you have so many reporters who actually do kiss up to the president, regardless of party. There's a certain amount of respect that has to be given, but some of them go a little overboard because they're always afraid that they're not going to. It's all about access, folks. It's all about access. And we even see that here in the Twin Cities. Our reporters, they go crazy. Why? Because it's all about access. Even when Tim Pawlenty was the Republican governor, the Democrat media actually still did bow down to him a little bit because he's the governor, and you don't want to be shut out of the game because that's their livelihood. So here is the exchange. We're going to go with a raw video. I'm not going to give you any commentary. You can make up your own mind for yourself, and we don't understand necessarily what the protocols are and the way of behavior and all of that, but the Trump-Acosta relationship goes back a ways. So this is nothing new, but you can kind of tell that both sides are getting a little testy with each other. So, well, and if you take a look at Acosta when the intern tries to get the microphone away from him, and he kind of shoves back a little bit. It's very, very quick. Blink and you miss it, so be careful. And then you just see the overall attitude and tone of the reporters towards this president. And yes, you do see the president being feisty and chipping right back. That's the exchange that they have. And Acosta lost his access over this.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign. In the midterms.
Here we go.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
Why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in
Not
this
at all.
election
No,
to
not at
try
all.
to keep?
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. They have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process, and I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign.
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
Your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on.
Well, that's true. But they weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. Right. These were people. This was an actual, it happened a few days ago. And
they're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of
you know
miles
what?
away.
I
That's
think
not an
you
invasion.
should, honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings
Let
would
me
be
ask,
much better.
if I may
Okay,
ask
that's
one other
enough.
question. Mr. President, if I may ask
Peter,
one
go
other
ahead.
question. Are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President,
That's
I was
enough.
going to ask one of the other folks.
That's
had,
enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President,
me. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have
I'm not concerned
indictments-
about anything with
that you
the
may have
Russian
indictments coming down?
investigation because it's a hoax.
Are you-
That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President,
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a very rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat people that way. Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter, go ahead.
In Jim's defense, I've traveled with him and watched him. He's a diligent reporter who busts his
Well, I'm
butt
not a
like the
big
rest
fan
of
of
us.
yours either, so
I understand.
to be honest.
So let me ask you a question if I can. You repeatedly
You
said...
you aren't the best.
Mr. President, you repeatedly, over the course of
Okay,
the...
just sit down, please. Well, when you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Mr. President, over the course of the last several days of the campaign, sir, at the end of the campaign, you repeatedly said that Americans need to fear Democrats. You said Democrats would unleash a wave of violent crime that endangers families everywhere. Why are you
Because
pitting
they're very weak on
Americans?
crime.
Why are
Excuse
you
me.
pitting Americans
Peter.
against one another, sir?
Peter, what are you trying to be him?
No, I'm
Peter,
just
let
asking
me
the question.
Let me just tell you, very simple. Because they're very weak on crime. Because they have often suggested, members and people within the Democrat Party at a high level have suggested getting rid of ICE, getting rid of law enforcement. That's not going to happen, okay? We want to be strong on the borders. We want to be strong on law enforcement, and I want to cherish ICE because ICE does a fantastic job. What they do for us is so it's so unrecognized how good a job they do. So we want to take care of them, and we want to hold them very close because they do a good job.
But the question,
Okay,
to be clear, though, the question,
Thank you
sir,
very
is
much.
why are you
sit down?
But but you didn't answer my question. Just very simply, the question is, why are you pitting Americans against one another, sir?
I'm not.
Is that how you view
No, I'm not.
citizens
well,
of
look,
this country?
I'll tell you what. We won a lot of elections last night. We did very well last night.
But in
and
many ways,
I
it
think
divided
going
the
to
country.
I think it's going to have a very positive impact. I watched NBC this morning. They didn't report it exactly correctly, but that's, that's the fact with NBC. Nothing I can do about that. But I want this country to have protection. We want security in our country. I want security, Peter. I mean, you maybe don't think it's so important. And I think when you don't have it, you are indeed unleashing crime. I feel that. Go
You
ahead.
said you would sign an executive order on birthright citizenship. Are you still going to sign the executive order on birthright citizenship
You'll
this
ask
week?
me that question a little bit later. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There are now...
And do you think President Obama would have been treated that way by the White House press corps? Actually, if you watch any of these press conferences, with the exception of Jim Acosta and a couple of others, most of them are pretty respectful. Yeah, they understand Trump enough to know that they've got to throw some hardball questions at him and repeated questions at him. But at the same time, Costa always goes over the line. He just doesn't quite know when to back off. And that's his problem. And so when you have let's put it this way. Back during the Obama years, Obama made it a little bit of a fight with Fox News. And if Shepard Smith or any of the Fox News people would have had pushed it like that with Obama, they would have had the press credentials revoked. Trump is playing their type of game against them. So Jim Acosta, he'll be replaced by somebody else. CNN will still have access. That's how the game is played. And you have to look at this as a lot of gamesmanship because that's really all this is. So Trump plays a game on the media plays a game on Trump, and there's a love-hate relationship. But they both know that they benefit from that because people tune in and watch. You think we'd be talking about Jim Acosta at all if he didn't have his credentials pulled? Of course not. And CNN knows that. It's all good for ratings. That's the way it is. We're going to move on now to the midterm elections. I've got my I voted sticker right here. I did. I voted. I just felt that I'll have a souvenir instead of putting it on my clothing because it never stays on anyway. But I have a question for you. Do you know where these came from? The answer might surprise you. And WCCO TV actually went out and asked the question and found the answer. Here it is.
They are now just a part of voting. You know, those little red stickers that we wear to show everyone that we did our part.
Dale from Red Wing wanted to know, where did the I voted stickers come from? Good question. Heather Brown traces them back to the 80s.
Kind of fancy with the buttons.
I know, the buttons are really nice, yeah.
I know, I'm kind of jealous now.
In Ramsey County, you can choose button or sticker.
I think it's a badge of pride to a certain extent.
And like, oh, you voted, and then we can, start, talking.
They see you went and did it and took the time out, maybe they'll go do it.
The Phoenix Association of Realtors says it came up with the idea back in 1985, though there are reports of stickers appearing in Florida 3 years before. Now, every state is different. There's the Ohio voting, the Georgia peach, Minnesota's red and white.
So you actually came up with this sticker.
That's right.
Joe Mansky is now Ramsey County's election manager, but 24 years ago,
1994,
he worked in Secretary of State Joan Groh's office. She'd heard about these stickers in other states and asked Mansky to bring them here.
And I thought to myself, I think this is the craziest idea I've ever heard. I mean, who wants to walk around with one of these dumb stickers on? But, when my boss tells me to do something, I go ahead and do it.
And the red sticker was born for the 94 primary. Mansky couldn't believe how many people were wearing them that day.
So I go back and I went to talk to Joan and I said, Joan, you were right and I was wrong.
And I want to make people aware of it, and I want people to ask me about it, and I want to help them get to the polling place.
This year, the state bought 6.5 million I voted stickers for Minnesota counties. At 0.3 cents a pop, they cost $24,000.
Why is it red?
It's red because I learned as a college student taking physics that red is the easiest color for humans to see.
So it's nonpartisan?
It's nonpartisan. It had, back in those days, color had no partisan connotation.
If they didn't have the stickers, would you be a little upset?
Heather Brown, WCCO.
Yeah.
4 News.
And there you have it. Joe Mansky, Ramsey County Elections, brought the I voted sticker here to Minnesota a long time ago. Now, what happened on that big election night? Well, our predictions were about half right. We kind of mixed what the nationwide election results were. I did predict on this show a couple weeks ago that Jim Hagedorn would win in the 1st Congressional District, that Jason Lewis would win in the 2nd. It would be a narrow loss. I wasn't even comfortable with that prediction. And Angie Craig did take that one. So I'm 1 for 1 there. I'm 1 and 1 there. I did not think that Eric Paulson would lose as much support as he did in the 3rd. While I did admit I couldn't see the landscape there, I did think that he had too much to give as far as the numbers were concerned. I was surprised. So yes, I missed 2, 1, 1. Of course, the 4th and 5th districts, those are foregone conclusions. Betty McCollum and Ilhan Omar. I wanted to say Keith Ellison, but I knew that wasn't right. So I got those right, but those are the no-brainers. Same thing with the 6th district. Tom Emmer. 7th district, that was a close race, but I did think Colin Peterson was going to pull it off, and he did. And in the 8th congressional district, Pete Stauber pulled up a sizable victory up in the 8th, and so he will. The Democrats flipped 2 seats, the Republicans flipped 2 seats, so really there's not much of a net change there. On the Senate side, well, it was pretty apparent that Amy Klobuchar was going to be reelected. And the Housley and Tina Smith race, I did think that Tina Smith not debating on the televised debate, I thought that would come back and haunt her, but Karen Housley couldn't quite secure the deal, and the Democrats did a great job with the turnout machine. I did predict the governor's race too close to call. I had absolutely no idea what was happening there. As we know, we now will have Governor Walz. And then the Attorney General's race, that one actually came, it was closer, but it still went the way of the Democrats, mainly because for the constitutional officers, people usually vote in a block. If they vote for the governor, they usually will vote for the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the State Auditor, the same way. So whoever gets the governors usually gets the other three constitutional officers, and rarely do you ever see a crossover. You saw some of that from the way that Wardlow was campaigning and the assistants that came in from out of Minnesota. But by and large, it went with whatever team was going to have the momentum on the night. My hat's off to the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party. They organized extremely well. They identified all of their supporters. They turned them out to the polls. And the Republicans did not match the effort. When I say the effort, I'm talking about the organizational and strategic effort. I'm not talking about the volunteer effort on the ground. The Republican Party ran a lot of great candidates. They lost a lot of incumbent Republican House member seats on the State House, which did flip to the Democrats. A lot of great people had put in thousands of hours of effort on both sides. But for the Republicans, they got swept. They got swept in the wave. And part of it was that they couldn't read the landscape correctly. And part of it was that the Democrats brought their A game. That's what happened. If I were going to advise Republicans, especially in St. Paul, rethink your strategy, because your strategy is off. The Democrats have run the same playbook, and it works for them. They're running the same playbook that the Republicans used to run until they changed playbooks around the 2004 election. Since 2002, only one Republican has won statewide races. One Republican, that was Tim Pawlenty in 2006. So if the Republican Party continues to go down the same path of running a stale playbook, stale strategy, they're going to continue to get swept. They're going to continue to get their butt kicked on Election Day, because what's wrong is not the candidates. Well, one can argue that some of the candidates weren't exactly didn't draw the best contrast with their Democrat rivals, but they're still good people. What you have is lack of political experience, lack of strategic thinking at the upper reaches of the Minnesota Republican Party. And until that changes, Republicans can expect that whoever the Democrats put up with in 2020, no matter what effort you do, if you're going to use a playbook that doesn't work, those 10 electoral votes are still going to go to the Democrat nominee. The problem that Republicans have to realize is that they are the ones who lost the election. If you examine the results and you saw the races closer than they were, you could make a case that they ran a very good campaign. They got their clock cleaned. If you saw that the state representative candidates were outperforming the top of the ticket regularly, you could make a case that maybe the top of the ticket was a little weak. But this was a front, sideways, downhill, up and down, butt kicking. And the Republican Party better sober up enough to realize that they're doing things wrong and that there are things that they need to do better. Otherwise, they're going to be in the wilderness for an awfully long time. So with that, let's take a look at election night with the Democrats' big win.
Democrat Tim Walz will be the next governor of Minnesota, beating out Republican Jeff Johnson. Walz's victory marks the first time one party has held control of the state's governor's office for 3 terms since the 1950s.
Let's go to KARE 11's John Krollman for a reaction to this race and other big Democratic wins.
Well, the party faithful came to St. Paul expecting maybe a mixed bag, but they got much more than that, going away with major wins across the slate in Minnesota.
Teacher, coach, soldier, congressman, add another job to the Tim Walz resume.
The governor
Governor-elect Tim Walz.
He won his first statewide race in convincing fashion and kept to his one Minnesota theme, even appealing to those who voted against him.
I will be your governor just as much as I will be for the people in this room. You could run a campaign based on bringing people together rather than dividing, based on setting a vision for a future, and the people embraced it.
His running mate, Peggy Flanagan, a member of the White Earth Nation, is the first Indigenous woman ever elected to lieutenant governor or to any statewide executive office.
It's not about me. It's about the folks who cleared a path for me to be here, and there's an opportunity for us to do so much more for folks who feel like they haven't had a voice.
Amy Klobuchar handily won a third trip to the U.S. Senate.
I think what you've seen is a number of people that are just sick and tired of the gridlock and the grandstanding.
And Tina Smith, appointed to the Senate 10 months ago, won the special election to fill the final 2 years of Al Franken's original term.
You know, there are now 23 women in the United States Senate, so we still have a ways to go, but it feels great tonight.
And it looks like Governor-elect Tim Walz is going to have a Democratic House to work with because the DFL picked up enough legislative seats to take control of that chamber. In St. Paul, I'm John Croman.
And we will show you Governor-elect Walz's acceptance speech.
Is strong tonight. The incredible work and sacrifice that went into win a campaign is incredible. To my family, I don't know how I can thank. To the person who makes this all happen, your next First Lady of Minnesota.
Okay, well, it looks like we do not have clear audio on that, so we are just going to skip that particular video. It's available out there on YouTube if you ever want to find it. That's if you haven't already watched it live or if you haven't already watched it on the news on other stations for the replays. So now, as I mentioned, I didn't think that Erik Paulsen was going to have get that big of a loss compared to what happened in 2016. So he was upended by Dean Phillips, Congressman-elect. So let's see what Dean Phillips has to say.
Good morning, it's 5:15. There were big Democratic wins for congressional races across the state, and this one would be hard to miss.
In Minnesota's 3rd congressional district, first-time political candidate Dean Phillips ousted 5-term Republican Congressman Erik Paulsen. As Lindsay Sievert shows us, this comes after a barrage of negative ads in one of the most expensive races we've seen.
Well, Phillips told his very enthusiastic supporters it only took 60 years, but we did it, referring to the historic moment when he flipped his seat from red to blue for the first time since 1961. He was introduced by his daughter Pia, who shared a story about this whole idea for his campaign began after the Trump election in 2016, when his daughters shared their fears and concerns with their dad. And now today, this moment.
You were light brigaders and you were flash mobbers. You waved signs on street corners, you brought food, and you brought love. And we started as raindrops, my friends, and we became an ocean. And I don't want this extraordinary energy and love to dissipate. If we're going to do this, we got to do it together. And it's not, I'm just one voice in Congress now to 435 people. We've got millions around the country who can affect a whole lot more change if we set our minds to it than any member of Congress can. And I simply want to inspire that.
There was great laughter and cheers when Phillips ended his speech, telling the crowd that he'd be holding his first town hall meeting very soon. Of course, referring to Paulsen's absence of town halls. But when I interviewed him, he said he wasn't kidding. He already has a town hall meeting planned for December. In Bloomington, I'm Lindsay Sievert for KARE 11.
And so that is that. So we do not have Congressman Jason Lewis in the 2nd anymore. It's now Congresswoman-elect Angie Craig, and there is Dean Phillips, the Congressman-elect in the 3rd district. So how did the Minnesota Republican Party react to election night? Let's take a look.
I want you to take a look at the sign over my shoulder. It says, "Make Minnesota Red." That's been the slogan for Republicans. It's what they hoped for, but that is not the reality this morning. Several boos tonight as some of those races were called. One of the big races that everyone was watching last night, the contest for Attorney General. Despite the back and forth and allegations against both candidates, Doug Wardlow didn't beat Keith Ellison. The races were competitive and tight. Incumbent Jason Lewis conceding to Angie Craig.
I wouldn't say a blue wave, but maybe a green wave. They had a heck of a lot more money than we did.
And a big surprise last night, incumbent Paulson lost his race to Dean Phillips. A decade. That's how long Eric Paulson held his seat representing Minnesota in the U.S. House of Representatives. And as he thanked supporters, he fought tears as he highlighted some of his successes.
It's absolutely been one of the highest honors of my life.
I gave Tim Walz a call. I absolutely don't just wish him luck, but I wish him success, because I want to retire in this state. I want my kids to raise their family in this state. And this is the greatest state in America, and I want it to continue to be that way.
Look, we came up a little short, but the battle endures. And we're not going away. You're not going away. We're going to win this thing. We're going to save this country once and for all, and we're going to hand it off to our kids and be proud of it.
Indeed, Tuesday night started as a night of optimism for many Republicans, but it ended with disappointment. However, they did take comfort knowing Republicans will retain the Senate. Back to you.
So yes, the Republicans will retain the Senate, the U.S. Senate and the Minnesota State Senate, because the Minnesota State Senate was not up on this ballot. So how did the polling data fare as far as Minnesota races are concerned? Were they accurate? Were they not accurate? Were they semi-accurate? And let's take a look at Reality Check.
Minnesota's turbulent 2018 midterm election is finally over, and it brought some surprises.
For many months, polls projected possible winners and losers. So how accurate were they? Here's Pat Kessler's Reality Check.
Public opinion polls don't predict the future. They take a photograph of the present. But over time, polls can accurately demonstrate political trends. DFL candidate for governor Tim Walz averaged a 10-point lead over Republican Jeff Johnson. Walz won by 12. Public polls had Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar up an average of 20 to 30 points over Republican Jim Newberger. She won by 24.
Tina Smith!
Polls gave Tina Smith an 8-point edge. The Democratic senator won by 11. Here's a 2018 race the pollsters got wrong.
This is not the result that we had hoped for.
Summer polls had former Governor Tim Pawlenty up 14 points over his Republican rival Jeff Johnson. But Johnson won the primary by 8.5. History does show polls are generally accurate with margins of error.
But polling methods are changing rapidly with technology. Polls used to be conducted making telephone calls on landlines. But now it's a combination of landline, online, and cell phone.
In October, the New York Times called 19,000 people in Minnesota's 8th District to scientifically sample 507 respondents. It put Republican Pete Stauber up 15 points. Stauber won by 6. That's Reality Check.
Oh, like everything else this election cycle, the polling is mixed. And I'm actually going to take a look right now and see, I just thought of this. Real Clear Politics. I'm just going to see the generic congressional, and they do not show, well, the generic congressional final was Democrats plus 7.3, but that does not actually, that was their final average, but it actually doesn't show the results yet, so I was kind of hoping they'd be updated, because the polling average and the final result are usually different. It's an average of 3.3%, skewing in favor of the Democrats, and I wanted to see if that average held true on this election, but so far That data has not been updated. Now, how did the night unfold for the national races? We're going to play the actual two clips back to back. The first one's from Wall Street Journal, and then the second one's from the Washington Post, just to give you a recap of the national races.
When all the votes were counted after Tuesday's big midterm election, we had a kind of a normal outcome, a split verdict. Democrats took back control of the House, Republicans retained control of the Senate, and there was a kind of a division in some of the big governor's races. But for a long time on Tuesday night, it looked as if a different story might emerge.
You hear warnings of a blue wave coming. Is it a wave or a tsunami?
We do believe there will be a blue wave. Democrats had dreams early on in the evening of a big blue wave taking over not just the House, but also the Senate and many of those governor's races. And for a while, the results that were coming in seemed to reconfirm that notion. But then a different reality set in. Here's how the night unfolded. Around 5 o'clock, exit polls and a big Associated Press VoteCast poll emerged that seemed to show Democrats were on their way to a very big night indeed. A lot of the women's vote was moving toward the Democrats, a big wave of women voters, and that looked like it might be enough to propel the Democrats to a bigger night than they had been expecting. First of all, Barbara Comstock, a Republican incumbent, was defeated by Jennifer Wexton, a Democratic challenger in Virginia.
Barbara Comstock, Republican member of Congress, losing her seat in Virginia.
And then in Florida, Donna Shalala, a former Democratic cabinet member, took over an open house seat that Republicans had hoped to hang on to. You had two big turnovers, and the signs of a big Democratic wave were taking shape. Then you also had some tantalizing possibilities in two really important states that seemed to confirm that idea. Again, in Florida, it appeared that the Democrats might win both a very hotly contested Senate race and a governor's race. They were leading in both of those races by a considerable margin. Bill Nelson, the Senate Democrat who was hanging on to a seat, it appeared, and Andrew Gillum, an African-American challenger, both took big leads in Florida. And in Texas, most surprisingly of all, Beto O'Rourke, a Democratic challenger, opened up a big lead over Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican incumbent, and Democratic dreams of not only taking the House, but having big wins in Senate races and governor's races were taking form right before their eyes.
Beto O'Rourke, the Democrat, he's ahead by 167,000 votes over Ted Cruz.
Then between 9 and 10 o'clock Eastern Time on Tuesday night, a different kind of reality began to set in. In two big Senate races in Tennessee and Indiana, Democrats were losing and losing big. Republican leads kept growing, and at 10 o'clock, both of those seats were called for the Republicans. At that point, the Democratic dreams of taking over the Senate pretty much ended. Next, those tantalizing Democratic leads in both Florida and Texas began to evaporate as well. Ted Cruz was declared the winner in the Texas Senate race at about 10 o'clock, and by 11 o'clock, Andrew Gillum, the Democrat who had been hoping to win the governor's race, conceded to Ron DeSantis, the Republican candidate. And Rick Scott, the Republican Senate candidate, held on to a very tiny lead, but it appeared he was on his way to victory as well. So the idea of having historic victories in two of the biggest states in the country disappeared for Democrats. And then late at night, some good news began to emerge for Democrats again. They won a whole series of closely contested House races, and it was clear the control there would be in Democratic hands. And Democrats won some of those closely contested Midwestern governor's races in Illinois, in Michigan, and in Kansas. So good news returned for the Democrats. So by about midnight, when all was said and done, we had a split decision. Some good news for Democrats, some good news for Republicans. A divided country politically had produced, appropriately enough, a very divided government for the next 2 years.
Democrats won the House on Tuesday night, and Republicans added some seats to their Senate majority. Here are some winners and losers. The first winner is Democrats. Yes, Republicans gained seats in the Senate, but Democrats actually took over a chamber of Congress. And any time we see control of Congress change hands, that's a significant night for the party that can do that.
Thanks to you, tomorrow will be a new day in America.
Another one is Nancy Pelosi. She was unseated as Speaker back in 2010 when Republicans won control of the House. She stuck around for years, unlike most speakers. Now she gets a chance to reclaim that gavel as long as Democrats will have her. Next one is Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is going to have a bigger Senate majority than he had before Election Day, and that's no small thing. More winners are felons in Florida. Amendment 4 in that state reinstated voting rights for most convicted felons. That actually applies to about 9% of the state's voting age population. Another winner, Democrats' diversity. We have the first openly gay elected governor in Jared Polis from Colorado, the first 2 Muslim women elected to Congress, the first 2 Native American women, and we also could see a record number of women elected to Congress. Another winner is John James, the Republican Senate candidate in Michigan. He didn't get a lot of national attention or national funding. He still came pretty close to beating Senator Debbie Stabenow. I expect John James will be around for another campaign and that Republicans will be much more anxious to support him next time. Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown scored a pretty early victory on Tuesday night and quickly talked about things as if he's going to be running for president in 2020. Brown has not given many indications about his 2020 plans. I think we saw that for the first time, really, on Tuesday night. A big loser on Tuesday night was Democrats' next generation of rising stars. Of course, the big one was Beto O'Rourke losing in Texas to Ted Cruz. We also saw Andrew Gillum lose the Florida governor's race. We saw Stacey Abrams apparently fail to make the runoff in the Georgia governor's race. And Randy Bryce, who earned a lot of attention as the challenger to House Speaker Paul Ryan several months ago, actually lost by double digits in an open seat race that Democrats had a good chance to win. Another loser is the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." We have a historically low unemployment rate. 8 in 10 voters said that the economy was good in the exit polls, and yet we saw the party in power lose control of a chamber of Congress.
This will be an election of Kavanaugh, the caravan, law and order, and common sense.
Another loser is President Trump's immigration strategy. There was a lot of thought that a more fear-based approach was geared towards turnout in red state Senate races. It may have provided that. It did not, however, seem to do anything to prevent Republicans from losing the House. And the final loser is voting against Brett Kavanaugh. Senators Joe Donnelly and Heidi Heitkamp were the most high-profile votes against him after having voted for Neil Gorsuch, and they did worse than we expected. Meanwhile, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, was the only Democrat to vote for Kavanaugh, and he wound up being just fine.
And that's the way midterms bounce. A couple of weeks ago, we covered how many seats that Republicans have won in large elections, how many Democrats have won in large elections, and this year turned out to be no different. The Democrats picked up so far 30 congressional seats to give them 225. Republicans lost 30 seats to bring them down to 198, and I believe there's still 12 seats up for grabs in the U.S. House of Representatives. And in the Senate, the Democrats were down 3. They're down to 46. Republicans up 3. They're at 52. And Arizona and one of the Mississippi races still have yet to be made official, and we do not know who is going to come out on top there. Go back to what we started the show with Hamilton, and ideas of federalism, and small government versus big government, and that part in between, in the middle. That's what we've been about ever since the founding of our country. How much is too much and how little is too little when it comes to government involvement in our lives. And that's what the parties fight over. That's what the candidates fight over. That's why we have swing elections. That's why we have divided government. That's why we have gridlock. And despite what they tell you on the press about, oh, we can't have gridlock, that's baloney. Sometimes gridlock is a good thing. It's a good thing because you don't want to have too much power concentrated by one ideology, or either side, slamming their views down the throats of the other side. Gridlock allows for communication. Gridlock allows for consensus building. Gridlock allows better ideas to move to the forefront. Of course, that also comes down to why we need good leaders in Washington and in St. Paul. Good leaders who are willing to acknowledge that there's some ideological, philosophical issues that are different that they bring to the table than their opponent. But at the end of the day, they can find stuff that they agree on and do something with finding that common ground to better our society. That's what gridlock brings to the table. And we're back in the gridlock mode. Let's celebrate that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Now we're going to leave you today with a video. Dallas, go ahead and start it. Keep my mic up for the first few moments here. We are coming up this week on the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. Now, on this show, we celebrated I can't say, I hate celebrating, but we observed the beginning of the war. We observed the beginning of the beginning. We observed the beginning of the war back in 2014. Was it 2014? Anyhow, I haven't thought this segment fully out. I'm not really going to be doing calendar math right now. The fact is, we had given you segments before if you watch the show for any great length of time. We have observed the 100th anniversary of the war. Now, even though this video is about the Christmas truce of 1914, which is, and we covered a whole show on it, the fact is, the final battle occurred with the armistice agreed to and signed on the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month, 100 years ago. And today is the 8th of November. The 11th of November marks 100 years. So we want to take a look back as we get away from politics. Let's take a look at two things here, the war and Christmas season. Because World War I is winding down, just as the 2018 midterms have wound down, World War I anniversary. And at the same time, we still have to acknowledge that the political season is over. Now is the time for everybody to enjoy the holidays and time to enjoy Christmas. So while we remember how we started our country, we acknowledged what we fought over, both in Washington and on the battlefield. This is time for peace. It's a time for truce. Time for truce 100 years ago. It's supposed to be the war to end all wars. And then, of course, right now is a time for a truce between the two political factions, the Republicans and the Democrats, as good people from both parties who are legislators who are duly elected who go to their respective state capital or capital Washington, D.C. to actually fulfill their duties to represent the people. So we're going to call for a truce here on North Star Ways. For Dallas Pearson, the producer, I'm your host, Jeff Williams. Remember, there's only 46 shopping days left until Christmas. Thanks for watching.
Happy
See you next week.
Frohe Weihnachten.